The writer's strike has been insane since its inception, whether that be speeches from the Empire.
We are union through and through, all the way to the end.
I am Locutus of Borg.
Or speeches that sound like they're in some kind of religious war. The writers and actors have already won the battle of solidarity and righteousness. The question now is how long before the studios get over themselves and make a deal. It's become clear that the AMTP cannot win the strike, so they should end it now to cut their losses. A disastrous summer. All of the PR comes from one direction. We're severely underpaid, we're starving to death, we desperately need more money.
Starvation wages.
The only thing that stands between us and food is your greed. We even got them retweeting stories about how David Zaslav was a Hollywood anti-hero. And this all comes at a time where the entertainment industry is at its lowest, producing things like Robin Hood. And you know they just saw the word Hood and ran with it. And yes, that's a Canadian production, but let's be honest, we've seen plenty of things that quality level already. With that in mind, you can understand why they took the cruel angle, rather than the we produce such great quality, we deserve to get paid more for our output. And you'll have to bear with me if I don't exactly believe these kind of stories. The majority of Americans support the writers. Gallup poll finds. Oh, I believe the poll found it. Whether it's an accurate representation of the American public, though, is an entirely different question. Especially when they say it's a whopping 72% are sympathetic to the strike. Although I can understand how that kind of thing happens. If you ask people, do you think they should get a pay rise? They're like, yeah, whatever.
But I guess it doesn't really matter.
But I think the question is it fair? Because the writers have had deals pitched at them and they weren't happy about them. They started calling it flawed counteroffer. Pay your workers. They don't know what they want, they just know they want to get paid. Because apparently they weren't before or something.
Union power! Union power!
How does it...
The studios keep saying that our priority is to end the strike, and the writers keep saying, no, we're just kind of carry on doing it. You get to a point where you're like, well, why should we bother? If you've got a list of demands, and then at the bottom you've just gone, and I want world peace, and they agree to give you everything you want, but look, we can't give you world peace. World peace is impossible. You're like, no, it's world peace and nothing. Welcome to the world of a Hollywood writer. Because we got their pattern of demands. Increased compensation. Standardized compensation. Talks about mini rooms. Oh, look, we want compensation. Protection for television writers. Comedy writers get stuff. Increased residuals. Pensions, AI, and some other stuff. Now, they have already agreed some of it, and tends to be the weird stuff. For instance, late night comedy writers got safeguards. Why? Out of every single piece of entertainment, late night comedy has to be the ones that people miss the least. Surely. Was anybody even watching it in the first place? Even James Corden left it. And it's the one area I've never heard anyone go, you know, I really miss Jimmy Kimmel. They need to pay these writers more because we need Jimmy Kimmel back on our screens.
That's gaslighting. That's what it is.
In fact, if there's one negative thing to come out of the strike, it is that. Turns out that Jimmy Kimmel was thinking of retirement before the writer's strike, and now actually, I really enjoy working, I'm gonna come back. So that's another incredibly positive thing we've got the writers to thank for. And the thing is, despite all their religious warfare talk, the writers did get an offer. And it was an offer that did pay attention to their demands. It gave them new things in AI, data transparency, residuals. But there was a problem with it. The WGA just decided to cut it. We're not gonna tell it to members, we're not gonna give it to the press. This is radio silence. And so the studios came out themselves and decided to tell everybody about it. Whether it was a PR move or simply because they thought it was a genuine offer that the WGA members deserved to know in an attempt to make them fall out and lose support for the strike when they're like, look, we could have this stuff. What are you doing over there? And I have to say, when you go through it, it looks pretty good. The highest wage increase for the WGA in 35 years. A compounded 13% increase over 3 years. On top of that, a 15% increase in weekly rates. This would take a writer from $9,900 a week, basically, to $11,000, almost $400 a week for guarantees of up to 9 weeks. And yes, it drops as you go up to 20 and 29, but you're still talking from 7.4k to 8.5k increase. If you're getting a pay rise of $1,100 a week over 29 weeks, how is your response to that they need to pay their workers?
Starvation wages.
Or as the LA Times put it, we recognize them for what they are, lowball offers. $11,000 a week. Residuals would increase from $72,000 to $87,000 per episode. And we'd have a new structure where showrunners would guarantee the length of employment and require at least 2 mid-level writers to be assigned to a production. This is something the WGA wanted because they wanted to train writers up, have them follow a production, so by the end, maybe they get promoted to different roles because they now have vastly more experience throughout the entire cycle, and leads to the next generation of creators. Great for everybody, but they're not happy that it was only 2. The WGA wanted minimum writing rooms of I think it began at 6 and went up to 12 involve people very quickly. It's just not how you run a business. And yet, as Variety reported, TV staff minimums remain the key sticking point, with some members grumbling nobody asked for this. Now, I did see this up on Twitter when it was just a load of WGA members underneath it going, no, I asked for this. It's like, of course you did. You want to keep your job.
Willow Ufgood here is terrified that one day he'll be discovered as the aging, talentless hack that he really is.
Whereas under this new structure, only the best writers will be able to keep a job in the first place. All the chaff and the talentless hacks, they'll just be yeeted out the door. So of course you want minimums. You want to be required to be on a staff writing force and just do nothing, except probably be a sensitivity reader and ruin the production. We understand why you want minimum writing rooms. I'm just surprised the WGA are willing to run it on for so long just to guarantee the jobs of some people that there isn't a place for. But they weren't the only pay increases. A new compensation structure. Writers will be guaranteed a minimum of 10 weeks employment for Article 14 writers. Week-to-week pay rise of 43.8% over the current rate. There will be landmark protections against AI, which is something the writers kept talking about all the time. I don't want to be scanned into a computer and used forever. I don't want to act out something that a computer has written with no soul. The studios even backed down on that, saying written material produced by AI will not be considered literary material. A writer will not be disadvantaged in any part of the script, and will maintain all of their compensation. Now, of course, the unwritten part of this is because we are going to use AI, yes, the writers will be involved, writers will interact with the AI, but that AI is still replacing some of the writers, so we'll just need less of you. And honestly, doesn't that seem like a fair deal? We're using new technology to make ourselves more efficient, so we'll just keep the best writers on board, and we'll pay them more money, significantly more money, but a lot of the lower tier writers will have to go. You know the ones. The ones who make things like Robin Hood.
I love that you never make any effort at all.
But with that in mind, you can understand why the WGA don't like it. Are their members going to accept an agreement where a significant portion of them get fired? Because I think when you're talking about minimum writings rooms, you've already moved way past reasonable requests. And if you're going to get fired at the end of it anyway, you're like, well, I might as well keep striking. Either way, I don't have a job. The studios even decided to give them increased transparency on viewership data, with the plan for that transparency to lead to further proposals of how to do it better in the future, because it is just hours per title, and quite frankly, that's not good enough. I do think if you're going to be transparent with the data, you should just publish the analytics. I'm sure you've already got them. If YouTube has analytics that allows us to see what happens on the videos, I'm sure all the streaming services have that as well. Just show it to them. What have you got to lose? What are you hiding from them, and why?
They'll never know what you sacrificed for them.
Is it because the numbers aren't very high? I'd love to know. But I do think when you've had an offer giving you the highest wage increases for writers in 35 years, any more talk about what we're asking for is fair and reasonable, remember that, or lowball offers goes out the window. You can't call it a lowball offer when it's the biggest wage increase in 35 years.
I'm not really feeling it.
Wait, I'm sorry. Are you using me as bait?
And if you are holding out just for minimum people in a writer's room, then if I were the studios, I'd just start hiring new people, because that is unacceptable. You cannot have a business that just voluntarily employs people it doesn't need and can't afford. That is a one-way path to bankruptcy. But have the studios already lost the strike? Now it's time to surrender. It even starts with, don't start a fight unless you're certain you can win it. The union started the fight, mate. They're the ones who went on strike. How are the studios ever going to be able to start a fight? Their only evidence that they've lost is apparently that we've got polls suggesting that Americans support the strike. It's like, okay, so whoever wins the strike has nothing to do with public opinion. It comes down to cold, hard cash and financial viability. But that is what they keep banging on about in the Times. That too backfired. We needed to hire a new PR firm. You know what would be best for PR? Ending the strikes. If you want a PR battle, you're already on the losing team, because nobody cares about the writers that have been destroying the entertainment industry for years. People would care about the writers if they were pumping out great entertainment.
Almost there.
There's a hot chick over there. I'm gonna go talk to it.
Sprinkle it on my bum and make my gentle winds smell like cinnamon.
Often said that Marvel movies all end the same way.
Mediocre at best.
Whereas at the moment, watching the strike unfold is far more entertaining than what you've actually been writing.
I'm not about to let a man take credit for a woman's work.
There was a lot of eating. There was a lot of food.
But they say that they rejected the proposal because it didn't offer meaningful concessions. Highest wage increase for writers in 35 years. If that's not good enough, I'd love to know what your number actually is. And they demand demand that television writing should be an economically sustainable profession. Pay increase from 9.8k to 11k a week. How much more economically sustainable do you want, mate? But they do get down to the cold reality where they say everyone knew the streaming platforms broke the traditional business model. But then they say, did they think the WGA and SAG-AFTRA weren't going to rise up, teeth gnashing? I'm like, I don't know. Did they want a job? If your industry can barely cope because streaming isn't profitable, and you come in gnashing your teeth, what do you think will happen to you? Where do you think the money's coming from? Because you can talk about how there are great business minds, but what if the greatest business minds got together and realized that you're financially unviable and they need to cut back on you? Current wages are financially unviable, and AI is the only way to actually maintain the industry going forwards by utilizing AI with a smaller writing force in order to be far more efficient. You know, like every other industry has done in the last 100 years. The longer it goes on, they just seem more surprised. They never thought it'd be their industry that got hit by the AI. Oh, sure, as the automated cars and trucks came down the road, I'm sure they'd be ever so sorry when they got laid off, but never thought it was going to happen to them. And people are coming forward now and saying it's time to tear the streaming model down to the studs. Now, he does start talking about AI and says he's not really that concerned because he doesn't think an AI can replace writers just by swapping into them and then getting rewritten. He says that data transparency is the one that keeps him up at night, which, to be fair, they gave you. Now, he does say something I don't agree with when they ask him about streaming. It's like, the great thing about Stranger Things is it blows up. Yeah, a pure cash windfall, but there is a problem. That as a streamer, you can't get more revenue streams because you're not selling it to anybody. And then he goes, same goes for a TV show. You just can't really monetize your monster successes. And I'm like, you can. Surely merchandise is where that extra money's supposed to come from. I think the bigger question is, as you never know which show is going to be a success, how do you get that merch out there fast enough? Like when Squid Game was at its peak, that's when all the items needed to be in the stores. No one was going to predict that that popped off as much as it did. And that's just one revenue stream. I'm sure there's others. Maybe it'll involve you being a bit more creative. That is your job after all. But I think the idea that people will only watch it once and that's it just seems like that's not really a problem with streaming. That's just television. But it gets really interesting when he starts to talk about releasing a movie, saying it was an experiment to see if you could release a movie worldwide without spending $30 to $40 million, and no, you can't. But since that time, he's been working with HBO Max, and they ask him, did you see any data while you were working with them? No. He was just given adjectives like, we feel good about these numbers. The comps are right in line with what we were hoping for. But when people don't give you numbers, that's when I'd be suspicious. What have you got to hide? Oh sure, you feel good about these numbers, but what if it's just you had ice cream this morning and so are in a particularly happy mood? And then he drops it. There's two potential reasons why we're not getting the information. One is that they're making a lot more money than anybody knows, or that they're willing to tell us. The other is that they're making a lot less money than anybody knows, and they don't want Wall Street to look under the hood in any significant way, because it'll crash the stock prices. My money's on door number 2. But what I do appreciate is his attitude, that he'd rather work in a version of the business where he knows what's going on, even if it means he has to make less money or take on more risk. He's still willing to bet on himself and take a bigger cut of the pie at the end, because he's confident in the quality of his product, like the WGA, which is asking for more upfront money and more residuals, so they get the best of both worlds, no risk at all. Bigger chunk of that benefit. The WGA's demands are insane, but this guy seems very sensible. But this guy's approach is far more sensible. And he even says that could mean a drastic reduction in things getting made, which is coincidentally what Disney said they're doing. Bob Iger, reducing the number of titles we have and the cost per title. So it's getting cheaper than making less of them and hopefully making them higher quality. Although that's going to be hard unless they get rid of a load of staff. And he says if we tear this thing down to the studs and find out that the math is funky, it's going to be quite the transformation. And so his feeling is the sooner we do it, the better, because one way or another, it's going to have to get rebuilt, so you might as well start now. And it may just be me, but somebody who's going, this entire system might need to get rebuilt, doesn't exactly strike me as someone who believes that it's because the studios are making a lot more money than anybody knows and they're willing to tell them. And yet that is exactly the idea that the WGA have been going off in the first place. Every single negotiation strategy. Starvation wages, you're making so much money.
7,000 or 8,000 an episode. Maybe that sounds great. Say I cobble together 2 or 3 guest stars a year.
So it's not acceptable behavior. It is embarrassing.
All we want is a tiny cut of your massive money, and yet if they're not telling the numbers because the numbers are really low, can you imagine having all of your workers storm out because they think you're rich, and you just sitting there behind the big desk in the big office, knowing that your numbers go down every year, and they have the gall to ask for this? I'd be pissed, and it would explain the attitude seen at the start, that the writers and actors just have unrealistic expectations. I'd said it was very disturbing, because he'll know the numbers. He'll know just how badly badly his streaming service is doing. If he's disturbed, then it's no wonder that their stock has crashed through the floor over the last year. And I can't help seeing the writer's room a lot like this meme. There's a load of people working hard to get that product out the door, and then you've just got a load of writers on the top just sitting there eating it, doing none of the work. Those would be the people hired under the staff minimums that aren't required, weighing everybody else down who has to work harder just to lift your sorry arse off the ground. If I were you, I would have been very thankful with the offer that you got, because I'm not sure you're factoring in opportunity costs at this point, with the fact that with every week dragging on, you haven't earned any money that week. And so at this point, even if you get a more historic rise than 35 years, it's still not going to make up for the lost money during all of these months not working. At this point, you can't win, which is why I found this headline very funny, because at this point, the WGA, whether they get pay rises or not, have defeated themselves. If they manage to pull it off and force Hollywood to hire people that they don't need, then they're doomed anyway, because those will be the writers who just aren't good enough and will drag the project down, producing bad entertainment, which makes no money, which makes the business lose money, which means inevitably more firings in the future. If you can't fight physics, you also can't fight economics. No, it's not looking good for the studios who are just cancelling series that have already finished filming at this point. And Disney wanted to cut even more content off their platform because it's worth more to them as a tax write-off, as a loss, than it is sitting on the platform where nobody's watching it because it's trash. Now, the longer this strike goes on, the more I think it goes into one simple thing. You're making trash, you have a job, and you decided to strike to get more money. And all you did is make the studios realize you were writing trash, give them force majeure, to give them the opportunity to get out of the terrible contracts that never should have been signed in the first place, after they realized the stuff is trash.
What you least expect that you're going to want to see is Thor going through a midlife crisis.
There were plenty of better times to strike in the past as a writer. The time to do it isn't when the industry is in free fall, their stocks are plummeting, they're all posting massive losses, and the economic downturn means that investors, they're not interested anymore. At that point, you decided you needed to get more money as you produced the lowest quality product that you've ever released. It's funny because in Wheel of Time, Rand worked in an insane asylum, but now it seems like to actually run this strike and to consider yourselves as winning it, that you're the ones that might be needing the padded room. But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe for more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.